The job posting was perfect in its emptiness. Overnight warehouse associate, no experience necessary, minimal interaction with coworkers. I'd read it 3 times before applying, savoring each word like a promise. After 6 months of unemployment and dwindling savings, I needed work. But more than that, I needed the kind of work where I could disappear. The Meridian Distribution Center squatted on the edge of town like a concrete beast, all harsh angles and sodium lights cutting through the October darkness. I pulled into the empty parking lot at 10:47 p.m., 13 minutes early for my first shift. The building hummed with the low drone of machinery, its loading docks gaping open like mouths breathing out warm, stale air. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional yellow that made everyone look slightly ill. The warehouse stretched out before me, endless rows of metal shelving reaching toward the ceiling, forklifts parked in neat lines like sleeping animals, and pallets stacked with boxes whose contents I'd never know or care about. "You must be Daniel." I turned to find a man in his 50s approaching, clipboard in hand, wedding ring catching the light. His name tag read Supervisor Rick. "Yes, sir." "Good, right on time." He looked me up and down, work boots, jeans, flannel shirt, and seemed satisfied. "You've done warehouse work before?" "Some." A lie, but a small one. I'd spent the last 5 years in data entry, watching numbers scroll across screens in climate-controlled offices. But I understood the rhythm of repetitive work, the comfort of tasks that didn't require conversation or creativity. Rick led me through the maze of shelving, explaining the basics. Incoming trucks arrived throughout the night. Pallets needed to be unloaded, sorted, stacked. Inventory had to be counted and recorded. The work was straightforward, methodical, perfect. "You'll mostly be working alone," Rick said, which sounded like heaven. "Occasionally we'll pair you up for the heavier loads, but generally speaking, you can keep to yourself out here." We stopped at a small break room tucked between the offices and the main floor. Vending machines hummed against one wall, their displays casting colored light across mismatched tables and chairs. A microwave sat on a counter next to a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. Breaks at 2 and 4, lunch at midnight, though most people just eat whenever. Rick checked his watch. "Tonight you'll shadow Jenkins. He's been here 8 years, knows the system inside and out." Jenkins turned out to be a thin man with graying hair and the kind of focused silence I appreciated. He showed me how to read the inventory sheets, how to scan barcodes, how to stack boxes so they wouldn't topple. We worked for 3 hours without exchanging more than a dozen words, and I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in months. This was what I needed. The predictable weight of boxes in my hands, the soft beep of the scanner, the whisper of cardboard sliding against cardboard. No small talk, no forced smiles, just work. At 2 a.m., Jenkins nodded toward the break room. "Coffee?" I followed him back through the warehouse, our footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. The building felt different at this hour, not empty exactly, but hollow in a way that made every sound seem important. Jenkins poured coffee that looked like motor oil and tasted worse, but the caffeine was welcome. "You'll get used to it," he said, settling into a plastic chair. "The hours, I mean. Your body fights it for a while, but eventually you stop feeling like you're walking underwater." "How long did it take you?" "Couple months, but I'm old. You're young. Might be easier." He studied me over his coffee cup. "What made you want night shift?" It was a fair question, and I'd prepared an answer. "I'm not much of a people person." Jenkins nodded like this made perfect sense. "Yeah, that's why I stayed. Started on days, but there's too much chaos. Supervisors breathing down your neck, day shift workers who think they're better than everyone else, constant interruptions." He took another sip. "Out here, it's just you and the work." "Just you and the work." I repeated the phrase like a mantra. The rest of the night passed in comfortable routine, load, scan, stack, repeat. By 6 a.m., my back ached and my hands were dry from handling cardboard, but my mind felt clearer than it had in months. I clocked out and walked to my car as the sun painted the eastern sky pale pink. The drive home took me through neighborhoods where normal people were starting their days, kitchen lights coming on, coffee makers gurgling to life, the first commuters backing out of driveways. I felt separate from all of it, like I'd crossed into a different world where time moved differently. My apartment was a one-bedroom box in a complex that had seen better decades. I'd moved there after the divorce when I needed something cheap and anonymous. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors' lives bleeding through. Morning showers, television shows, arguments that started with dishes and ended with slammed doors. I pulled the blackout curtains closed and fell into bed as the rest of the world woke up. The second night was easier. I knew where everything was, how to read Rick's handwriting on the assignment sheets, which forklift made that grinding noise that meant it needed maintenance. Jenkins and I fell into a rhythm. He handled the computer terminals while I did the physical inventory, both of us content with the arrangement. Around 1 a.m., while I was counting cases of something called industrial solvent in aisle 14, I heard voices near the loading dock. New voices. Jenkins appeared at the end of the aisle. "We got a new guy starting tonight," he said. "Rick wants me to show him around so you'll be on your own for a while." I nodded and went back to counting. The warehouse felt different with 3 people in it instead of 2, though I couldn't say exactly how. Maybe it was just the additional footsteps echoing off the walls, or the way voices carried differently when there were more of them. I was in the middle of logging inventory numbers when I heard someone behind me. "So you're the other night shift guy?" I turned to find a young man leaning against the end of the aisle, arms crossed, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. He was maybe 23 or 24, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it and sharp features that the fluorescent lights turned to angular. He wore the same uniform as everyone else, khaki pants and a polo shirt with the company logo, but somehow made it look deliberate rather than required. "Daniel," I said, because he seemed to be waiting for something. "Marcus." He pushed off from the shelving and walked closer, and I noticed he moved with the kind of loose confidence that came from never doubting you belonged wherever you were. "Jenkins is giving me the grand tour, but honestly, how much is there to see? It's boxes and shelves and more boxes. That's pretty much it." He laughed, a sound that seemed too loud for the space between us. "Yeah, that's what I figured, but hey, at least the company's better than my last job." I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. Instead, he picked up one of the boxes I'd been counting and examined the label. "Industrial solvent. Sounds exciting." "Not really." I was being sarcastic. "I know." He set the box down and looked at me more carefully. "You always this talkative?" "Usually less." That got another laugh, softer this time. "Fair enough. Well, I should get back to Jenkins before he thinks I wandered off. See you around, Daniel." He walked away, hands shoved in his pockets, and I went back to counting. But something about the interaction stuck with me, the way he'd said my name, maybe, or the fact that he'd bothered to introduce himself at all. Most people would have just nodded and moved on. I didn't see much of Marcus for the rest of the night. Jenkins kept him busy with orientation tasks, and I had my own work to finish. But I was aware of him in the way you're aware of a new sound in your house, not necessarily disruptive, but present. The third night, Rick paired us together. "Marcus needs to learn the receiving process," he explained, handing me a clipboard. "Show him how to unload and sort. There's a truck coming in around midnight." I nodded, though something in my chest tightened. I'd gotten used to working alone, to the predictable silence of my own thoughts. Adding someone else to the equation meant conversation, explanation, the exhausting work of being social. Marcus appeared at my shoulder as I was reviewing the manifest. "So what exactly does receiving involve?" "Unloading trucks, sorting cargo, making sure everything matches the paperwork." "Sounds riveting." I glanced at him. "You say that a lot." "What?" "Sarcastic things." He shrugged. "It's a defense mechanism. Helps me cope with the crushing monotony of modern existence." Industrial solvent and crushing monotony. You should write greeting cards. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he grinned, and the expression transformed his entire face. Did you just make a joke? Maybe. Holy shit. The mysterious night shift guy has a sense of humor. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation. He laughed again, and I realized I liked the sound more than I should have. It was warm and genuine, the kind of laugh that made you want to earn another one. The truck arrived right on schedule, backing up to Dock 3 with a hydraulic whine of air brakes. The driver was a woman in her 40s who looked like she'd been driving all night, which she probably had. She handed me the shipping papers and headed for the break room without a word. Friendly, Marcus observed. They usually are. Long-haul drivers don't waste energy on small talk. We dropped the dock plate and opened the trailer. It was packed floor to ceiling with pallets, each one wrapped in plastic and labeled with codes that corresponded to the manifest. The air inside was thick and stale, warmer than the warehouse. So how does this work? Marcus asked. I explained the process while we positioned the pallet jack. Each pallet had to be scanned, verified against the shipping list, and moved to the appropriate staging area. It was methodical work that required attention to detail, but not much conversation. For the first hour, we worked mostly in silence. Marcus was a quick learner, picking up the rhythm without much guidance. He was stronger than his lean frame suggested, handling the heavier pallets without complaint. But I could feel him watching me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. So, what's your story? He asked as we maneuvered a particularly awkward load off the truck. My story? Yeah, like what are you doing here? This doesn't seem like a career move. I guided the pallet jack toward the electronics section, buying time. I needed a job. Come on, that's not a story, that's a fact. What's the difference? A story has context, background, motivations. He paused to adjust his grip on the plastic wrap. Like I'm here because I got kicked out of college for having what my academic advisor called a fundamental lack of respect for institutional authority, which is academic speak for smart mouth. Despite myself, I smiled. What were you studying? Psychology. Ironic, right? Turns out understanding why people do things doesn't make you any better at not pissing them off. We reached the staging area and positioned the pallet. I made a note on the manifest while Marcus stretched his back. Your turn, he said. My turn what? To tell me why you're here. I looked at him, really looked. He was watching me with genuine curiosity, not the polite interest people usually showed when they were just making conversation. There was something disarming about his directness, the way he asked questions like he actually wanted to know the answers. I used to work in an office, I said finally. Data entry, 40 hours a week of staring at spreadsheets and pretending to care about quarterly reports. What happened? I got divorced, lost the house, needed something different. It was the abbreviated version, leaving out the months of sleeping on my brother's couch, the job applications that went nowhere, the way I'd started to feel like I was disappearing even when I was sitting right in a room full of people. But it was more than I'd told anyone in months. Different how? Quieter. Marcus nodded like this made perfect sense. Yeah, I get that. Sometimes you need to step back from the world for a while. We went back to the truck for the next pallet, and I found myself stealing glances at him as we worked. There was something about the way he moved, economical but fluid, like he was comfortable in his own skin in a way I'd never been. When he reached for something, his shirt pulled tight across his shoulders. When he bent to check a label, his hair fell across his forehead in a way that made my chest feel strange. I told myself it was just the late hour, the artificial light, the way night shift messed with your perspective on everything. But when our eyes met across a stack of boxes, something passed between us that felt more significant than shared work. You always this quiet? He asked as we positioned the pallet jack under another load. Only when I don't know what to say. That's honest. Is that good or bad? Good. Most people just fill the silence with bullshit. We worked for another hour, the conversation coming in fits and starts. Marcus told me about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. about parents who thought college was a waste of time until he got a scholarship, about professors who didn't appreciate what he called his alternative perspectives. I found myself sharing more than I intended, about the way my marriage had ended not with fights but with silence, about the apartment that felt like a waiting room, about choosing night shift because I'd forgotten how to be around people during regular hours. That's the thing about the dark, Marcus said as we finished with the last pallet. It makes everything feel more honest somehow. I knew exactly what he meant, though I couldn't have explained it. There was something about working through the night that stripped away the usual pretenses. Maybe it was the isolation or the way artificial light made everything feel slightly unreal, or just the simple fact that the rest of the world was asleep while we were awake. By the time we finished unloading, it was nearly 3 a.m. The truck driver had long since left, and the warehouse felt even quieter than usual. Marcus and I walked back toward the main floor, our footsteps echoing off the concrete. "Not bad for your first receiving shift," I said. "Thanks. You're a good teacher." "I'm not much of a teacher." "You'd be surprised." Something in his tone made me look at him, but his expression was unreadable. We reached the intersection where the aisles branched off in different directions, the natural place to separate and return to our individual tasks. "See you at break?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, see you at break." He headed toward the automotive section while I went back to my inventory work. But as I walked away, I could feel him watching me go. When I glanced back, he was still standing at the intersection, hands in his pockets, that unreadable expression on his face. I didn't know what he wanted from me, but every night I found myself hoping he'd show up again. The next few shifts fell into a new rhythm. Marcus and I were assigned to work together more often, tackling the larger shipments that required 2 people. Rick seemed pleased with the arrangement. We worked well together, finished tasks efficiently, didn't cause any problems. But there was something else happening beneath the surface of our professional partnership. Small moments that felt charged with meaning I couldn't quite name. Like the way Marcus would hand me tools, his fingers brushing mine for just a fraction longer than necessary. Or how he'd position himself when we were moving heavy items so that we were standing closer than strictly required, close enough that I could smell his shampoo and feel the heat radiating from his skin. Or the way he'd catch me looking at him and hold my gaze for a beat too long before smiling that grin that made my chest feel tight. I told myself I was imagining things, reading too much into casual interactions. Marcus was friendly and easygoing, the kind of person who probably made everyone feel like they had his undivided attention. It didn't mean anything, but late at night in the artificial twilight of the warehouse, it was easy to believe it meant everything. One night we were assigned to do a deep inventory of the storage area in the back corner of the building. It was a section that rarely got much traffic, mostly overstock and seasonal items that sat for months at a time. The shelving was older here, metal-painted industrial green that had faded to the color of old money. We worked our way through the aisles systematically, Marcus calling out item numbers while I checked them against the master list. It was tedious work, but the isolation felt different with him there. Less lonely. More like we were the only 2 people in the world rather than the only 2 people forgotten by it. "Jesus, look at this stuff," Marcus said, examining a box labeled Holiday Decorations, 1998. "How long do they keep things back here?" "Forever, apparently." "That's depressing. Like a graveyard for Christmas trees and plastic pumpkins." I looked around at the dusty boxes and outdated inventory, seeing it through his eyes. "You think about things differently than most people." "Is that good or bad?" "Just different. You notice things." "What kind of things?" I paused, clipboard in hand, trying to find the right words. "Details that other people miss, like how the fluorescent lights buzz in a pattern or the way the forklift tracks make different sounds depending on the load they're carrying. Most people tune that stuff out. But you don't." "No, neither do you." He was quiet for a moment, studying my face in the dim light. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more," he gestured vaguely. "Closed off, I guess. When I first saw you, you seemed like you wanted to disappear." I do. But not right now." It wasn't a question, and I didn't treat it like one. We stood there in the narrow aisle, surrounded by boxes of forgotten merchandise, and I felt more present than I had in months. Marcus was close enough that I could see the flecks of green in his brown eyes, close enough that when he breathed, his shirt moved in a way that made me want to reach out and touch him. "We should get back to work," I said, but neither of us moved. "Yeah," he agreed. "We should." A sound from the main warehouse broke the spell. Footsteps, probably Jenkins making his rounds. Marcus stepped back, and the moment dissolved like sugar in water. But as we returned to our counting, I caught him glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between curiosity and something else entirely. The next night, Marcus wasn't there. Rick mentioned it casually during the shift briefing. Marcus called in sick, food poisoning or something. "You'll be working alone tonight, Daniel." I nodded and took my assignment sheet, but something hollow opened up in my chest. It was ridiculous. I'd worked alone for weeks before Marcus arrived, had preferred it that way. But the warehouse felt different without him. Quieter in a way that wasn't peaceful, just empty. I found myself listening for his voice, his laugh, the sound of his footsteps on the concrete floor. Every time I passed the break room or the loading docks, I half expected to see him there, grinning at some private joke. The hours crawled by. I finished my tasks early and found myself wandering the aisles, straightening shelves that didn't need straightening, double-checking inventory that was already accurate, anything to keep busy, to keep my mind from dwelling on why his absence felt so significant. At 4 a.m., I took my break and sat alone in the break room, staring at the vending machines. The coffee tasted more bitter than usual, and the silence pressed against my ears like cotton. This was what I'd wanted, I reminded myself. Solitude, peace, the ability to work without having to consider another person's presence or feelings or expectations. But want was a funny thing. Sometimes you didn't realize it had changed until what you thought you wanted was taken away. Marcus was back the next night, looking slightly pale but otherwise normal. He apologized for missing work, explained about the questionable takeout from a place near his apartment, made jokes about the dangers of late-night dining. I wanted to tell him I'd missed him, that the warehouse had felt wrong without him there, that I'd found myself looking forward to our shifts together in a way that went beyond simple workplace camaraderie. Instead, I said, "Feeling better?" "Yeah, much. Thanks." And we went back to work. But something had shifted during that night of absence. I was more aware of him now, more conscious of the way his presence changed the entire atmosphere of the warehouse. When he laughed, I felt it in my chest. When he stood close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, every nerve ending seemed to wake up. I started noticing details I'd missed before. The way he rolled his sleeves up to his elbows when we were doing physical work, revealing forearms that were stronger than they looked. How he chewed his lower lip when he was concentrating. The small scar on his left hand that he claimed came from an unfortunate incident involving craft scissors and youthful overconfidence. One night, we were working in the pharmaceutical section, counting cases of over-the-counter medications that had to be tracked more carefully than regular inventory. It was detail-oriented work that required focus, and we'd been quiet for the better part of an hour. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, breaking the silence. "Sure." "Do you ever miss it? Your old life, I mean." I considered the question while I counted bottles of pain relievers. "Parts of it." "Which parts?" "Having a purpose, I guess. Feeling like what I did mattered, even if it was just organizing data that someone else would use." "What about the personal stuff? Being married?" The question caught me off guard. Marcus rarely asked about my divorce, seemed to understand it was a territory I didn't want to explore in detail. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "but probably not for the reasons you'd think." "What do you mean?" I set down my clipboard and looked at him. "I miss having someone to cook for, someone to ask how my day was, even if the answer was always fine. I miss the illusion of being known." Illusion? We were married for 4 years, and I don't think either of us ever really saw the other person. We saw the version we wanted to see or needed to see or expected to see. Marcus was quiet, absorbing this. That sounds lonely. It was more lonely than being actually alone. Is that why you like the night shift? Because it's honest about being solitary? Maybe, or maybe I just wasn't built for regular human interaction. I don't believe that. The certainty in his voice made me look up. He was watching me with that intense focus he sometimes turned on things, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Why not? Because you're talking to me, and you don't seem miserable about it. He was right, though I couldn't have explained why. Conversation with Marcus felt different than it had with my ex-wife or with coworkers at my old job. There was no performance involved, no careful editing of thoughts before they became words. He asked questions like he genuinely wanted to know the answers, and when I answered, he listened with his whole attention. "What about you?" I asked. "Do you miss college, having a plan?" "I miss the idea of having a plan," he said. "But honestly, I was never sure the plan was mine to begin with. Sometimes I think I went to college because it was expected, not because I actually wanted to be there." "What do you want?" That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He picked up a case of vitamins and examined the label. "I know what I don't want. I don't want to spend my life in meetings about meetings. I don't want to wear ties or pretend to care about synergy or core competencies or whatever bullshit language they use to make meaningless work sound important." "But you can't work night shift forever." "Why not? Maybe this is better. Maybe there's something to be said for honest work, even if it's not glamorous." I understood what he meant. There was a purity to the warehouse work that my office job had lacked. The tasks were straightforward, the goals clear. You moved boxes from point A to point B. You counted inventory and recorded the numbers. You solved immediate, concrete problems instead of generating reports about potential solutions to hypothetical issues. "Besides," Marcus continued, "the company's not terrible, and some of the people are interesting." The way he said it, with a glance in my direction, made heat rise in my chest. I turned back to my counting, but I could feel him watching me. "Very interesting," he added, softer this time. I didn't trust myself to respond, so I focused on my work. But the rest of the shift felt charged with something unspoken, like the air before a thunderstorm. 3 weeks into working together, we developed our own small rituals. Marcus would arrive exactly 15 minutes before his shift started and spend the time wandering the warehouse, claiming he was getting the lay of the land, but really just postponing the moment when Rick would assign him his tasks. I would usually be finishing up my preparatory work during those 15 minutes, organizing my equipment and reviewing the night's assignments. One night I was restocking my supplies from the storage closet when I felt someone watching me. I turned to find Marcus leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying me with that unreadable expression. "What?" I asked. "Nothing. Just watching you work." "Why?" "You're methodical. It's interesting." "Methodical is just another word for boring." "No, it's not. It's calming. Like watching someone who knows exactly what they're doing." I'd never thought of myself as someone who knew what they were doing. Most of the time, I felt like I was improvising my way through life, making it up as I went along, but there was something in the way Marcus looked at me that made me feel more competent than I actually was. "You ready for tonight's adventure in industrial inventory management?" he asked. "What's on the schedule?" "Cleaning supplies. Apparently, we need to reorganize the entire section because someone's been putting things back in the wrong places." Thrilling. Hey, at least we'll be working together. That makes even reorganizing bleach bottles tolerable. The cleaning supplies section was in the far corner of the warehouse, isolated from the main traffic patterns. It was one of the older areas with shelving that looked like it had been installed sometime in the Carter administration. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered occasionally, casting intermittent shadows that made everything feel slightly unstable. Marcus and I spent the first hour pulling everything off the shelves, creating organized piles on the floor. Industrial cleaners, disinfectants, paper products, equipment, decades of accumulated supplies that needed to be sorted, counted, and restocked according to the updated organizational system Rick had provided. "This is weirdly satisfying," Marcus said, stacking boxes of paper towels. "Like organizing a really boring version of Tetris." You find satisfaction in strange places. Don't we all? I mean, what's the point of only enjoying the things you're supposed to enjoy? I looked at him, crouched on the floor, surrounded by bottles of floor cleaner, hair falling across his forehead as he read labels. There was something almost childlike about his concentration, the way he approached even mundane tasks with genuine curiosity. What do you mean? Like, everyone's supposed to enjoy sunsets and music and good food and whatever, but what about the satisfaction of perfectly organizing a shelf, or the way empty hallways echo, or how fluorescent lights make everything look like a David Lynch movie? You think fluorescent lights are enjoyable? Not enjoyable exactly, but interesting. They make everything feel slightly unreal, like you're living in a different version of the world. He was right, though I'd never thought about it in those terms. The artificial light did create its own atmosphere, transforming the ordinary warehouse into something that felt separate from normal life. Under fluorescent bulbs at 3 in the morning with no one else around, it was easy to believe that different rules applied. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of our task creating its own kind of communication. Marcus would hand me supplies without being asked. I would hold shelves steady while he positioned items. We moved around each other in the narrow aisles with an awareness that felt more intimate than professional. At one point, we both reached for the same box of trash bags at the same time. Our hands touched. Just fingertips, really, but the contact sent something electric up my arm. Marcus didn't pull away immediately, and neither did I. For a few seconds, we stood there with our hands overlapping, neither of us moving. "Sorry," he said finally, but his voice was softer than usual. "No problem," but we both knew it wasn't nothing. The air between us felt different after that, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. By 3 a.m., we'd made significant progress. The shelves were half restocked, everything organized according to Rick's new system. Marcus suggested we take our break, and I agreed, though I was reluctant to leave the isolated corner where we'd been working. The break room felt too bright after hours under the flickering lights of the cleaning supply section. Marcus got coffee while I bought a package of cookies from the vending machine, the kind of processed sugar that tasted like childhood and regret. "You know what's weird?" Marcus said, settling into the chair across from me. "What?" "This is the most normal I've felt in months. Working the night shift in a warehouse is normal? Normal for me, I guess, like I'm not pretending to be someone else." I knew exactly what he meant. There was something about the isolation of night work that allowed you to exist without performance, without the constant low-level anxiety of wondering whether you were meeting other people's expectations. College was the worst for that, Marcus continued. Everyone pretending to be intellectual, pretending to care about theories and concepts that had nothing to do with real life. I felt like I was acting in a play I didn't understand. What would you have studied if you could have studied anything? Photography, maybe, or writing, something that involved actually looking at things, really seeing them. You could still do that. Could I? I mean, practically speaking. I've got student loans and rent and all the usual adult bullshit. There are community colleges, online programs. You don't have to abandon the idea completely. He looked surprised, like the possibility hadn't occurred to him. You really think so? I think you notice things other people miss. That's the most important part. What about you? If you could do anything, what would it be? The question caught me off guard. I'd gotten so used to thinking about what I needed to do to survive, find work, pay bills, get through each day, that I'd stopped thinking about what I might actually want. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I used to think I wanted stability, a career, a house, a plan for retirement, the whole middle-class dream. But I'm not sure that was ever really what I wanted or just what I thought I was supposed to want. So what do you want now?" I looked at him across the small table, studying his face in the harsh light of the break room. What did I want? To keep working night shifts indefinitely? To maintain this strange, isolated existence where the only person I had real conversations with was a 24-year-old college dropout who made industrial solvents sound like poetry? Maybe. Maybe that was exactly what I wanted. I want to figure that out, I said finally. Marcus smiled, and something in his expression made my chest feel warm. That's a good start. We finished our break and went back to work, but the conversation lingered in the air between us. There was something different about the way we moved around each other now, more aware but also more comfortable, like we'd crossed some invisible threshold. By the time we finished reorganizing the cleaning supplies, it was nearly 5 a.m. The shelves looked perfect. Everything in its designated place, labels facing out, inventory counts matching the master list. Rick would be pleased. Not bad for a night's work, Marcus said, surveying our accomplishment. Not bad. We gathered our equipment and headed back toward the main warehouse. The building felt different at this hour, quieter in a way that suggested the night was winding down. In an hour, the day shift would start arriving and the whole rhythm would change. Same time tomorrow? Marcus asked as we reached the time clock. Same time tomorrow. But as I drove home through the early morning streets, I found myself thinking about the way he'd looked at me when our hands touched, the way he'd said my name like it meant something important. The night shift was supposed to be about solitude, about finding peace in isolation. Instead, I was discovering that some kinds of connection were worth losing sleep over. A week later, Rick assigned us to a project that would take several nights to complete, a complete reorganization of the electronics storage area. It was a detailed work that required careful handling and meticulous record-keeping, the kind of task that would keep us working closely together for hours at a time. Think you can handle being stuck with me for an entire week? Marcus asked when Rick explained the assignment. I'll manage. Just manage? I'm wounded. But he was grinning when he said it, and I found myself smiling back despite myself. The electronics section occupied a corner of the warehouse that felt separate from everything else. The shelving was newer here, designed specifically for delicate equipment, and the lighting was better, less of the harsh fluorescent glare that dominated the rest of the building. It was quieter too, insulated from the main traffic flow by walls of inventory. Marcus and I spent the first night just assessing the scope of the project. Thousands of items needed to be cataloged, reorganized, and properly stored. Cell phone accessories, computer components, small appliances, all of it mixed together in a system that had clearly evolved organically over years rather than following any logical plan. Whoever organized this originally must have been drunk, Marcus said, examining a shelf where Bluetooth speakers were mixed in with printer cables and phone chargers. Or maybe they just ran out of space and started putting things wherever they fit. Same thing, really. We worked methodically, creating organized piles on the floor while making notes about what we found. It was satisfying work, bringing order to chaos, making the invisible visible. But I was increasingly aware of Marcus's presence beside me, the way he moved, the way he breathed, the way he occasionally hummed under his breath while he worked. You realize we're going to be spending a lot of time together, he said during our second night on the project. Is that a problem? No, just an observation. But there was something in his tone that suggested it meant more than he was saying. We'd been working together for weeks now, but this project felt different, more isolated, more intimate. By the third night, we'd fallen into a rhythm that felt almost choreographed. Marcus would hand me items without looking, knowing exactly what I needed. I would anticipate where he was going to move and adjust my position accordingly. We communicated in glances and gestures as much as words. We're getting good at this, he said as we finished sorting a particularly complex shelf of audio equipment. Good at what? Working together, reading each other's minds. He was right. Somewhere along the way, we developed an almost telepathic awareness of each other's movements and intentions. It was the kind of synchronization that usually took months or years to develop, but had emerged naturally from our shared focus on the work. Maybe we're just both methodical, I suggested. Maybe we just fit. The way he said it, casual but loaded with meaning, made something flutter in my chest. I looked at him, trying to read his expression, but he was already turning back to the next shelf. On the fourth night, we were working in the deepest corner of the electronics section, surrounded by towers of equipment that blocked the view from the main warehouse. It was after 2 a.m., and the building felt particularly quiet. Even the usual mechanical sounds seemed muted, as if the world had narrowed to just the space between the shelves where we worked. Marcus was crouched on the floor, sorting through a box of miscellaneous cables, when he looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Sure." I've never had a job where I looked forward to coming to work. Never? Never, but I actually get excited about these shifts. Not because of the work, obviously, because of— He gestured vaguely between us. "This, whatever this is." I felt heat rise in my chest. "What do you think this is?" "I don't know. That's what makes it interesting." We looked at each other across the narrow aisle surrounded by the detritus of modern electronics, and I felt something shift in the air between us. Not the gradual, subtle change that had been building for weeks, but something immediate and electric. "Daniel," Marcus said, and my name sounded different in his voice, softer, more deliberate. "Yeah?" Have you ever— He trailed off, but I understood what he wasn't asking. The question that had been lurking beneath the surface of all our conversations, all our careful, not quite touching, all our loaded glances. "Yes," I said simply. His face changed. Relief, curiosity, something that might have been hope. "Really? Does that surprise you?" "Not surprise exactly, but it explains some things." "Like what?" "Like why you never talk about dating anyone new. Like why you seem so comfortable with me being the way I am." "What way are you?" He laughed, but it was nervous rather than amused. Confused, mostly, about a lot of things. I set down the tablet I'd been using to log inventory and moved closer to him. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "What kind of things?" "Like why I care so much about what you think of me, why I look forward to seeing you every night, why I keep finding excuses to work close to you." "Those don't sound like confusing things." "They do when you've spent your whole life thinking you knew who you were." I understood. The careful construction of identity, the assumptions about yourself that go unexamined until something, or someone, forces you to look more closely. I'd been there myself, years earlier, in a different warehouse in a different city with a different person who'd made me question everything I thought I knew about desire. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," I said. "But I want to understand what this is, what I'm feeling." "What are you feeling?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his expression was more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. Like I've been sleepwalking for years, and I'm just now waking up. The honesty in his voice hit me like a physical thing. I wanted to reach out and touch him, to close the distance between us, but I forced myself to stay still. "That's not a bad thing," I said. "Isn't it? Everything I thought I wanted, everything I planned, none of it makes sense anymore. Maybe it never made sense. Maybe you just needed permission to admit it." We stared at each other across the small space between us, and I could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Everything we'd been circling around for weeks was right there in the air between us, waiting to be acknowledged or dismissed. Then Marcus moved closer, just a few inches, and the space between us felt charged with electricity. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said quietly. "Neither do I." "But you want to find out?" "Yes." It wasn't a dramatic moment. No sudden rush of passion or cinematic sweep of emotions. Just two people acknowledging something that had been building slowly, carefully in the spaces between words and work. Marcus reached out tentatively and touched my hand where it rested on a box of computer monitors. His fingers were warm and slightly calloused from weeks of handling cardboard and metal. "Is this okay?" he asked. "Yes." We stayed like that for a moment, his hand covering mine, both of us breathing carefully like we were afraid of breaking something fragile. Then Marcus shifted closer, close enough that I could smell his shampoo and feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "I should probably tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have no idea what I'm doing." "That's okay. We'll figure it out." He looked at me with an expression of such trust and uncertainty that something in my chest cracked open. Without thinking, I reached up and touched his face, my thumb brushing across his cheekbone. "We don't have to rush anything," I said. "I know, but I don't want to wait anymore." When he kissed me, it was hesitant and careful, like he was asking a question with his mouth. I answered by kissing him back, my hand sliding to the back of his neck, feeling the soft hair at his nape. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, not long enough to be anything but a first kiss, a test of possibility. When we broke apart, Marcus rested his forehead against mine. "Wow," he breathed. "Good wow or bad wow?" "Definitely good wow." We stayed close for another moment, both of us processing what had just happened. Then, almost simultaneously, we became aware of where we were, in a warehouse at work, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of electronics that we were supposed to be organizing. "We should probably get back to work," I said, though I made no move to pull away. "Yeah, probably." But neither of us moved. We knelt there among the boxes and cables, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, and I felt more present than I had in years. Finally, reluctantly, we separated and returned to our tasks. But everything felt different now. The air between us hummed with new awareness. When Marcus handed me something, his fingers would linger on mine. When I moved past him in the narrow aisle, he would lean into the contact just slightly. "So," he said after we'd worked in charged silence for another hour, "what happens now? What do you want to happen?" "I want to keep kissing you, but I also want to keep working with you, and I'm not sure how to do both." "We'll figure it out, one thing at a time." "Is that how it works? One thing at a time?" "I don't know. I've never done this before either." "What do you mean? You said you'd been with men before." "I have, but not like this. Not someone I work with, not someone I see every day." Marcus nodded like this made sense. "So we're both making it up as we go along." "Pretty much." "Good. I like that better than having to follow someone else's playbook." We finished the night's work in a state of heightened awareness, every interaction charged with new meaning. When our shifts ended and we walked to the parking lot together, Marcus stopped beside his car and looked at me with that same uncertain expression. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "Same time tomorrow." But when he drove away, I sat in my car for several minutes, replaying the kiss, the conversation, the way his hand had felt covering mine. Everything had changed in the space of a few hours, and I wasn't sure what it meant for the careful balance we'd built over the past weeks. What I did know was that I was looking forward to the next night in a way that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with the possibility of discovering what came next. The following evening, I arrived at work 15 minutes early, my nerves jangling with anticipation and anxiety. I'd spent the day replaying our conversation, our kiss, trying to figure out what I wanted to say when I saw Marcus again. But when he appeared in the warehouse, looking as uncertain as I felt, all my planned words evaporated. "Hi," he said. "Hi." We stood there for a moment, the weight of the previous night hanging between us. Then Marcus smiled, that same warm grin that had been disarming me for weeks, and the tension broke. "Ready for another thrilling evening of electronics organization?" he asked. "Can't wait." We fell back into our work routine, but with an undercurrent of awareness that changed everything. When Marcus leaned close to show me something on his inventory sheet, I could feel the heat from his body. When I reached past him for a box, he would go still in a way that suggested he was cataloging the contact. Around midnight, we took our regular break. The break room felt too public, too exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights, so instead we found ourselves on the loading dock, sitting on concrete barriers and looking out at the empty parking lot. "I've been thinking about last night," Marcus said, not looking at me. "Me too. I keep wondering if I imagined it." "You didn't." "Good, because it was—" He paused, searching for words. "I've never felt anything like that before." "Like what?" "Like everything suddenly made sense, like I'd been putting together a puzzle wrong for years and finally found the right piece." I understood exactly what he meant. There had been something about that kiss that felt inevitable, like we'd been moving toward it since the first night we worked together. Are you scared? I asked. Terrified. You? Yeah. But you want to keep going anyway? Yeah. Marcus turned to look at me then, his face serious in the yellow glow of the security lights. I need you to know something. This isn't some kind of experiment for me. I'm not trying to figure out if I'm gay by using you as a test case. I didn't think you were. Good, because this feels too important to be casual about. What does it feel like to you? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the empty street beyond the parking lot. Like coming home, which is crazy because I've never thought of another person as home before. Something warm spread through my chest at his words. That's not crazy, isn't it? We barely know each other. Don't we? We've spent hours together every night for weeks. We've talked about things I've never told anyone else. That's true. He smiled slightly. You know me better than most people ever have. And? And I trust you, which is maybe even scarier than the other stuff. We sat in comfortable silence after that, both of us processing the magnitude of what we were acknowledging. When we went back inside to finish our shift, something had settled between us, not resolved exactly, but accepted. The rest of the week passed in a haze of increased intimacy. Nothing dramatic, we were still at work, still focused on our tasks, but the space between us felt different now, charged with possibility and new understanding. On Friday night, we finished reorganizing the last section of electronics inventory. The project that was supposed to take a week had stretched into 8 days, partly because we were thorough, but mostly because neither of us wanted it to end. Working together on something so detailed had created its own kind of intimacy, a shared focus that felt almost meditative. Well, Marcus said, surveying our completed work, I guess that's it. Yeah, Rick will probably split us up next week, give us different assignments. Probably. Neither of us was happy about the prospect. We'd gotten used to working as a team, to the easy communication and shared rhythm. More than that, the isolation of the electronics section had provided a kind of shelter where we could explore what was happening between us without worrying about observation or interruption. We'll still see each other, I said, though it sounded weak even to me. It won't be the same, though. No, it won't. Marcus walked over to where I was standing and stopped close enough that I had to look up to meet his eyes. I don't want this to end, he said quietly. This? Working together, talking to you every night. Whatever's happening between us. It doesn't have to end. Doesn't it? Once we're not working together anymore, once we don't have an excuse to spend time together. I reached out and took his hand, feeling the familiar warmth of his skin against mine. Then we make our own excuses. Like what? Like coffee after work, like meeting somewhere on our nights off, like admitting that this isn't just about work anymore. Hope flickered in his expression. Is that what you want? Yes. Even though it's complicated? Especially because it's complicated. Marcus squeezed my hand, then looked around at the organized shelves surrounding us. You know what's funny? I'm going to miss this place, this specific corner of the warehouse where we figured everything out. We can come back and visit. Promise? Promise. But even as I said it, I knew he was right. This particular configuration, the two of us working alone in the isolated corner, surrounded by the detritus of the digital age, discovering something analog and immediate in each other, would never exist again. Whatever came next would be different, would require different kinds of courage and different kinds of trust. The thought should have been sad, but instead it felt like graduation, like we'd learned something important in our makeshift classroom and were ready to take it out into the wider world. Come on, I said, still holding his hand. Let's finish up and get out of here. Where are we going? I don't know. Somewhere we can keep talking without worrying about inventory counts and shipping schedules. Marcus grinned. I like the sound of that. We gathered our equipment and headed back toward the main warehouse, but instead of going straight to the time clock, Marcus tugged me toward a section I'd never explored, a narrow corridor between the offices and the loading docks that led to a service door. Where are we going? I asked. Trust me. The service door opened onto a small concrete platform with metal stairs leading up to the roof. Marcus climbed without hesitation, and after a moment of uncertainty, I followed. The warehouse roof was flat and industrial, covered with HVAC units and various antennas. But from up here, you could see the entire city spread out in the distance, a grid of lights that looked almost beautiful in the darkness. "How did you know about this?" I asked. "I explore when I'm bored. Found this place my second week." We sat on the edge of the roof, legs dangling over the side, looking out at the view. The night air was cool but not cold, and the sounds of the warehouse were muted by distance and concrete. "It's different up here," I said. "Everything looks smaller from a distance." "Including our problems?" "Maybe. Or maybe it just puts them in perspective." We sat in comfortable silence, both of us processing the events of the past few weeks. From this vantage point, the warehouse looked insignificant, just another low building in an industrial landscape. But it had become the setting for something that felt monumental in my personal geography. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked. "How strange it is that we met here, in the least romantic place imaginable." "I don't know. There's something romantic about fluorescent lights and cardboard boxes, don't you think?" I laughed. "Only you would say that." "It's true, though. Romance isn't about the setting. It's about finding someone who sees the world the same way you do." "And how do I see the world?" "Like it's full of details worth noticing. Like there's beauty in ordinary things if you pay attention." "Is that how you see it too?" "I'm learning to. You're teaching me." Something warm bloomed in my chest at his words. I reached over and took his hand, interlacing our fingers. "What happens on Monday?" I asked. "When Rick gives us different assignments?" "We figure it out, one shift at a time." "And if one of us decides to quit, find a different job?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Then we meet somewhere else, same hour, same silence." "Promise?" "Promise." We stayed on the roof until it was almost time for our shifts to end, talking about everything and nothing, making plans that felt both tentative and inevitable. When we finally climbed back down and clocked out, the sun was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. In the parking lot, Marcus walked me to my car and stopped close enough that I could see the flecks of green in his brown eyes. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For seeing me. For being patient while I figured things out. For making me feel less alone. You don't have to thank me for that." "I want to, though. This whole thing, working nights, meeting you, discovering parts of myself I didn't know existed, it's changed everything." "Good change or scary change?" "Both, but mostly good." I leaned forward and kissed him, soft and brief, a promise rather than a goodbye. When we separated, he was smiling. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "Same time tomorrow." I watched him walk to his car, noting the way he moved with more confidence than he'd had when we first met. At his car door, he turned back and caught me watching. "What?" he called across the parking lot. "Nothing, just, I'm glad you answered that job posting." "Me too." He got in his car and drove away, and I sat in mine for a few minutes, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Monday would bring new assignments, new routines, new challenges. But whatever came next, we'd face it with the knowledge of what we discovered together in the quiet corners of the night shift. It wasn't the end of anything, it was the beginning of everything else. Part 2. The words hung in the air between us like smoke, visible and substantial in the dim light filtering through the warehouse skylights. Marcus sat on a wooden crate 3 feet away from me, his work clothes rumpled from the long shift, his hair mussed from running his hands through. Yes, it. A nervous habit I'd learned to recognize over the past weeks. I don't know why, but I feel different when I'm around you. I stared at him, this young man who had somehow slipped past all my carefully constructed defenses, and felt something fundamental shift in my chest. The words I might have said, deflections, jokes, safe responses that would keep us in familiar territory, died before they reached my lips. Instead, I just looked at him, really looked. The way his shoulders curved forward slightly, as if he were protecting something vulnerable in his chest. The way his hands rested on his knees, fingers splayed wide like he was trying to ground himself. The way he was watching my face, searching for something. Acceptance, understanding, maybe just the confirmation that he wasn't alone in whatever this was. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full of all the things we hadn't said, all the moments when our hands had brushed accidentally, all the conversations that had gone deeper than workplace small talk, all the ways we'd been circling around this acknowledgement for weeks without naming it. Finally, quietly, I said, "Different how?" Marcus exhaled, a sound that was part relief and part surrender. Like, I'm more myself, like all the noise in my head gets quiet and I can finally think clearly. He paused, studying his hands. Like I've been walking around in fog for years, and suddenly the air is clear. I understood exactly what he meant. There was something about his presence that made me feel more solid, more real. The apartment that had felt like a waiting room, the divorce that had left me feeling like a ghost haunting my own life, the careful isolation I'd built around myself, all of it receded when Marcus was nearby. "I feel it too," I said, and watched relief wash over his features. "Yeah?" "Yeah." We sat there in the mechanical twilight of the warehouse, surrounded by towers of inventory that blocked us from view, and I felt something that had been held in suspension finally settle into place. Not resolution exactly, but recognition, an admission of what had been building in the spaces between our work. "So what do we do about it?" Marcus asked. "I don't know. We can't exactly pretend it's not happening. No, we can't." Marcus stood up from his crate and moved closer, close enough that I could smell his skin, soap and cotton and something that was uniquely him. He sat down on the concrete floor beside my crate, leaning back against a stack of boxes. "This is probably a terrible idea," he said. "Probably. Getting involved with someone from work, someone I barely know, someone who's—" He gestured vaguely in my direction. "Someone who's what?" "More experienced, more settled, more sure of who he is." I almost laughed at that. "Marcus, I'm the least settled person I know. 6 months ago, I was married and working in an office and thought I had my life figured out. Now I'm divorced, working night shift in a warehouse and having conversations like this with someone I met stacking boxes. But you seem so calm about everything, like you know what you want." "What I want," I said carefully, "is to figure out what this is between us, without rushing it, without making assumptions about what it means or where it goes. Can we do that? Just see what happens?" "I think so, if we're honest with each other." Marcus nodded, then shifted so he was facing me more directly. "Can I be honest about something? Please. I've never felt this way about another guy before. I mean, I've thought about it, wondered about it, but I've never actually, He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. "You don't have to explain anything to me." "I want to, though. I want you to understand that this isn't casual for me. This isn't some kind of experiment or quarter-life crisis or whatever." "What is it then?" He was quiet for a long moment, searching for the right words. "It's like you said earlier, like finding someone who sees the world the same way you do, but more than that. Like finding someone who makes you want to see more of it." Something warm and fragile bloomed in my chest. I slid down from the crate to sit beside him on the concrete floor, our shoulders almost touching. "I haven't felt this way about anyone in a long time," I said. "Man or woman, not since college maybe." "What happened in college?" "I met someone, another guy. We were close, but I was scared and young, and I talked myself out of it. Convinced myself it was just confusion, just proximity, just the intensity of being away from home for the first time." "Do you regret it?" "Yeah. Not because of what might have happened with him specifically, but because I spent so many years trying to be someone I thought I was supposed to be instead of figuring out who I actually was." Marcus leaned closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his shoulder. "So this time you want to figure it out?" "This time I want to be honest, with myself and with you. Even if it's complicated?" "Especially if it's complicated." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the magnitude of what we were acknowledging. The warehouse hummed around us, the distant sound of machinery, the whisper of air circulation, the occasional creak of metal settling. It should have felt industrial, impersonal, but instead it felt private, like we were the only two people in the world. We should probably get back to work, Marcus said eventually, though he made no move to stand. Probably. Rick's going to wonder why we're taking such a long break. Rick's in his office playing solitaire. He's not paying attention to what we're doing. Marcus laughed softly. You've figured him out pretty well. It's not hard. He's a decent guy who's just trying to get through his shift with minimal drama. Like all of us. Like all of us. But still, neither of us moved. There was something about this moment, sitting on the concrete floor in the dim light, having finally acknowledged what had been building between us, that felt too important to abandon for the sake of productivity. Can I ask you something? Marcus said. Sure. When did you know that you were attracted to men, I mean? I considered the question. I think I always knew on some level, but I was good at ignoring it, at telling myself it was something else. It wasn't until college that I couldn't pretend anymore. What changed? I met someone who made ignoring it impossible, someone who made me want to stop pretending. Like I do? I looked at him, really looked. The uncertainty in his eyes, the way he was holding himself like he was braced for rejection, the vulnerability he was showing me by asking the question at all. Yeah, I said. Like you do. Something in his expression shifted, uncertainty giving way to something that looked like wonder. Really? Really. Because sometimes I think I'm imagining all of this. The way you look at me sometimes. The way conversations feel different when it's just us. The way you make me feel like I'm not crazy for wanting. What do you want? Instead of answering with words, he moved closer, close enough that our knees were touching, close enough that I could see the individual lashes framing his eyes. Then, slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed me. It was different from our first kiss the week before. Less tentative, more sure, but still gentle enough to feel like a question. I answered by kissing him back, my hand coming up to cup the side of his face. When we broke apart, Marcus rested his forehead against mine. I've been wanting to do that all night, he whispered. Just tonight? All week, maybe longer. Why didn't you? Because I was scared. Because I didn't know if you wanted me to. Because once I kissed you again, I knew everything would change. And now? Now I'm still scared, but I don't care anymore. I kissed him again, longer this time, feeling the way he melted into the contact like he'd been holding himself rigid and could finally relax. His hand found the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair, and something deep in my chest unclenched. When we separated, we were both breathing hard. Jesus, Marcus breathed. Good Jesus or bad Jesus? He laughed, the sound shaky but warm. Definitely good Jesus. We sat there for another moment, foreheads touching, sharing the same air. Then Marcus pulled back slightly, his expression serious. I need to tell you something, he said. Okay. I've kissed guys before, but I've never actually, he gestured vaguely between us, done this, been with someone like this. You don't have to explain. I want to, because I don't want you to have expectations that I can't meet or think that I know what I'm doing when I don't. I reached out and took his hand, interlacing our fingers. Marcus, you don't have to have everything figured out right now. We're not in a rush. But what if I'm bad at this? What if I don't know how to be with someone? Then we'll figure it out together, one thing at a time. You'd be okay with that? With me not knowing what I'm doing? I'd be okay with anything, as long as you're honest with me about what you want and what you don't want. Relief washed over his features. I can do that. Good. Because that's all any of this is, being honest about what we want. And what do you want? I considered the question seriously. What did I want? To kiss him again, definitely. To keep talking to him through the long night hours, learning the way his mind worked, the things that made him laugh, the stories he'd never told anyone else. to see what it felt like to be with someone who made me feel more like myself instead of less. I want to keep getting to know you, I said finally. I want to see where this goes without putting pressure on it to go anywhere specific. That sounds perfect, does it? Yeah. Because that's exactly what I want too. We were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing from somewhere in the main warehouse, probably Jenkins making his rounds, or maybe one of the other night shift workers heading to the break room. The sound reminded us where we were, that we weren't actually alone despite how it felt. We should get back to work, I said reluctantly. Yeah, we should. But as we stood up and gathered our equipment, something had fundamentally changed between us. Not just the acknowledgement of attraction, but the decision to pursue it honestly, to see what developed without forcing it into predetermined shapes. We spent the rest of the shift working in the main warehouse, assigned to different sections but aware of each other in a way that felt heightened. When our paths crossed in the aisles, we would exchange glances that lasted a beat too long. When we passed each other reaching for supplies, there would be the briefest contact, a brush of fingers, the whisper of fabric against fabric, that sent electricity up my arm. It was subtle enough that anyone watching would have seen nothing out of the ordinary. Just two coworkers going about their tasks efficiently and professionally, but underneath the surface, everything was different. Around 3 a.m., we ended up working in adjacent aisles, close enough to talk quietly without being overheard. How are you doing? I asked, scanning a box of office supplies. Good. Different, but good. He paused. You? Same. No regrets? No regrets. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of our tasks creating its own kind of intimacy. When Marcus finished his section first and moved to help me with mine, we fell into the familiar pattern of shared work, him handing me items, me logging them, both of us moving around each other with an awareness that was both professional and personal. I like working with you, he said as we finished the last shelf. Just working? Okay, I like everything about being around you. Working is just the excuse. Good thing we have jobs then. For now. Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. What do you mean for now? I mean this job isn't forever. Eventually one of us is going to want to do something else, go somewhere else. And I don't want this, whatever this is between us, to end just because we don't work together anymore. I understood his concern. The warehouse had become the container for our relationship, the excuse for spending time together, the place where we discovered what we meant to each other. Without it, we'd have to find new ways to be together, new contexts for exploring what we were becoming. It won't end, I said. We'll just have to be more intentional about it. How? Coffee after work, dinners on our nights off, normal dating stuff. Dating? The word seemed to surprise him. Is that what this is? I don't know. Is it? I considered the question. I think it's whatever we want it to be. Then yes, I want it to be dating. Good, me too. We finished our tasks and headed toward the break room for our 4 a.m. break. It was empty except for us, which had become the norm. Most of the other night shift workers took